George Clooney and Brad Pitt's new movie Wolves is on Apple TV Plus September 27th.
That's where I want you to be now.
So if you want to see George Clooney and Brad Pitt, go to Apple TV Plus.
You got to start the story there.
Or if you want to see Brad Pitt and George Clooney, go to Apple TV Plus.
I am enjoying the show.
And if you want to see their new movie Wolves,
You can't do it, I'm going to help you out. I can do it, so do it.
definitely go to Apple TV Plus.
Admit it, it's cool. Okay, fine, it was very cool.
Wolves, streaming September 27th on Apple TV Plus. Rated R.
This episode is brought to you by Allstate. Some people just know they could save hundreds on car insurance by checking Allstate first. Like, you know, to check you have the tickets in your wallet first before you drive 2 hours to the big game. Seriously, you had one job. Now the closest you'll get to the 50-yard line is parking lot D. Yeah, checking first is smart. So check Allstate first for a quote that could save you hundreds. You're in good hands with Allstate. Savings vary. Terms apply. Allstate Fire and Casualty Insurance Company and Affiliates. Northbrook, Illinois.
Something about that intro just gets you excited to talk some hockey. And I get to sit down with one of the friends of the show, been on every single season. I appreciate you, Anthony. Anthony, how's the weekend going, man?
So, weather here in Philly has been really, really great. No complaints. Chance to get, with family and everything. With my son getting ready to start college, obviously he's starting off at Drexel University. So it's been kind of sort of the final weekend before he kind of starts that journey. So it's been good in that regard.
Well, that's always a good time. Man, my daughter's starting junior high. I cannot imagine going off to college. That is,
my youngest is an 8th grader too. So the idea of trust me, I think we finally gotten to the point in our family where we've gotten to the acceptance stage, I guess you could say, of this.
The next step is it's just going to happen now.
Yeah, exactly. It's just now we go forward.
Jeez. All right. Well, let's jump into this. Yes, this is going to be a Flyers and some Maple Leaf stuff at the end. I always like to get your outside opinion, but I do follow the Flyers. Like I told you before, they were my favorite team before Jeremy Roenick did the thing in that game. I'll always bring it up because that broke my heart. But the Flyers summer to you was what?
The Flyers summer really it was defined by a guy we're going to talk about probably a good bit today, is the somehow much sooner than expected arrival of Matvei Michkov. It was probably is the thing that's probably defined the offseason the most, because of that player obviously going to be, in this circumstance, he's obviously already a big part of the selling of the team this season in terms of getting people into the arena. Right now, the Flyers, their summer was basically about, some of the previous roster players, some veteran players kind of held it out, and others, obviously, them identifying last season who they wanted to keep on board going into it. And there were some names maybe that surprised some people that ended up coming out on long-term deals. I think, certainly when they decided to bring Nick Seeler back on a four-year deal. But again, I think this whole summer really kind of had the whole, 1 year in, they're now a full year under John Tortorella, and how they as a team are kind of just getting things, sort of trying to determine who they are as a team. And they during most of last season, they had established an identity similar to their coach. Obviously they might be, light in terms of their overall skill level on the team throughout the lineup. There's definitely some skilled players and certainly young players who are developing. But they punched high. They punched much above their weight talent wise throughout the season. And then obviously later on in the season, things kind of fell apart for them down the stretch, and they didn't make the playoffs. So how can they reinforce in this offseason who they are as a team? And they're still in a cap situation where it's difficult for them to make big splash moves. I still think they're probably another year or two away from that, as they're continuing to certainly to shed salary. One of the bigger ticket players that obviously exited was Cam Atkinson, who now is who's bought out. That was a consideration that they made. There had been some initial conversations about whether or not Scott Lawton's name kind of came up on the rumor mill a few times, but he remains a Flyer at this point. The other, again, it was some surprises too. Obviously, I think the longer term extension of Garnet Hathaway, but they like Hathaway a lot. They especially where they're at as a team. They also have a Nick Delorier, so Hathaway obviously has the ability to drop the gloves, but I think Hathaway kind of provided that sort of hard forecheck that is a staple of a John Tortorella team. And I think they just feel like, at least at this point of where they're at as a team, having him back was something that they prioritized. And there could be obviously a discussion about whether or not they should or should not have done that, but I understand the logic behind it. Let's put it that way.
Well, having a guy like Hathaway in there, it's good to keep the flies off some of the younger guys, especially if you have the guy that we're going to talk about here very shortly in your lineup as well. You want him to feel a little bit safe out there. Someone's trying to troll him or do those things. And there are players in the league, the rats that run it sometimes. So a new guy like that's coming in, they want to set a tone. And with a guy like Hathaway in your lineup, you're not doing that. It's the Ryan Reeves effect over here. It's that cop on the bench that, hey, I took a number, I'll get you in a minute. And
but you have to be able to. Here's the thing with that again, and this is not knocking Reeves or anything along those lines. But Hathaway, he is a player that definitely was a low key. I guess you could in some ways say he was kind of a low key darling on the advanced analytics, and that's something I think that may have played a little bit of a role. That he can provide you some really, really good support play. And you could play him a little high, I think, versus a guy like Nick Delorier, who pretty much he's fourth line, and and obviously Delorier was, if we're talking about the play, obviously the young player we're about to talk about, but Delorier is obviously another player who's going to hopefully, in this case, at least the Flyers hope, will be a guy that will help to protect that young asset. But Garnet can play a little higher in the lineup, probably third line in those circumstances, and be able to play because he can skate. That's the one thing you can always tell with Garnet with Hathaway is he's a good skater, and he's going to give you everything he has from a two-way perspective, and he's going to agitate and do things to try to get the other team to make mistakes and give the Flyers other opportunities, and that may play a bigger role this year if they're able to kind of figure things out on special teams, specifically the power play.
Well, one guy that's going to help that right away is the guy who just came in, all the fanfare, all the hoopla, all the everything that goes in with Matvei Michkov. I want to know, is he right now worth the hype? Obviously, a guy who has not played NHL games yet, but is going to. Looks like he's going to be the de facto number one right wing for the Philadelphia Flyers.
I would say so, certainly. I would put that in. I would put it in pencil for now because again, he looked very good in the first. And they just had their rookie series with the New York Rangers up in Allentown. This weekend, Friday and then Saturday. Michkov played the first game, and he played on a line with Jet Luchenko, who's the Flyers' first round pick in this year's draft, who also looked very good, and along with Elliot Desnoyers. And I liked what I saw, and certainly there's. The one thing you always have to kind of keep in mind with Michkov is the fact that obviously he's played at the highest level of Russian hockey in the KHL, and was able to be productive. But obviously playing up against men, there's times things go look really good, and there's times when there's things to learn.
Yes.
What I got a chance to see based on when I watched the broadcast was a player that absolutely has audacious a skill set. He has. He's going to do things and attempt things that, his line mates are going to have to keep their stick on the ice for. I was pretty impressed. We talk all about his goal scoring, and he did score a power play goal in the game against the Rangers. Just his down low play. What surprised me a little bit was how he played. He played some greasy hockey. His goal was a greasy goal at the post.
Yep.
Which was something that, this is a guy who plays with that level of drive. That's some gritty hockey. That's something that's going to already endear himself to Flyer fans. But then you layer on the other skills that he has, and again, there are still things that he's going to have to learn. He is not in year one going to be a complete product. especially in many ways having the relationship between obviously him and John Tortorella is going to be a fascinating one to watch. But I would say also that, for everybody's like, Tortorella is all about defense, and he is. Ask a player like, and certainly in Artemi Panarin when he played in Columbus, he was not shackled offensively there, but it was just expected that you bite back on the play. You play, you don't leave the defense to your line mates in this case. So Michkov showed things in this game, in his first game, in a rookie game, that I was very impressed with. There's still going to be areas that are going to have to be worked on. Again, this is a rookie game with peers his age, or a little bit older in some cases. You're going to get into the preseason, and then you're going to get into the regular season, and then the pace. This is the top level now, and he's going to have to he's going to have some hard nights in the NHL. That being said, there's going to be I would advise patience. You're going to have those bursts and moments where he's going to tantalize you, and there's going to be moments where he may struggle. And this is something, again, when you're asking a 19-year-old kid who's jumping over for the first time to play North American hockey, it's, you hope he jumps in, is able to, and is able to be that franchise level player. Is that realistic in year one? Probably not.
No, I mean, even look at Connor Bedard last year. There's obviously the flashes of brilliance, but, it wasn't 100 points on the board, but it's a person who's growing into the NHL and learning the everyday rigors of it too, and going through injury trouble and stuff like that. So there will be things, not saying that Michkov's going to get injured or anything, but, you will learn and cut your teeth and figure it out your own different way. For him, one thing that I found interesting is I know John Tortorella, we all saw his thoughts on the Michigan stuff when he was on the broadcast side of things before he became a coach again. We see Michkov attempt that, and I'm just wondering, is that going to mesh well with Tortorella, or does he understand that this player is special and those moves probably will come with his skill set throughout the season in different plays where he's going to try to not only endear himself to the fans, but of course these guys want to make a name for themselves as well?
I think there may be a little bit of, put it this way, if he's playing good two-way hockey and attempts it, I think there probably might be a little bit more leeway. If it becomes a case where he's being a liability defensively and he attempts to do it, that might get a little bit, that'll I think will probably get, and he might get a little more of an earful from Torts in that circumstance. I think that's what it comes down to is, again, John, I think Torts is old school in that way, but I think that what he's looking for here is that you start off with a strong base. I don't think he wants to shackle anybody offensively. If anybody who saw last year when obviously Jamie Drysdale was healthy, they get the green light when he was acquired in the Cutter Gauthier trade was to be a rover. He wanted him to be an offensive threat, and I think he wants. I'm sure he's looking forward to getting his hands on him and utilizing, because again, in order to be able to win some of these games that the Flyers are going to be in, if the effort, the culture and the effort is there in terms of the overall play of the team, having that additional weapon out there to a game-breaking talent, is something that I think John Tortorella will recognize and want to cultivate. If he does, again, if he's not doing what I think is being asked of him as an overall player developing, and he attempts to do a Michigan, that's something that might get a little bit of an earful on that.
For sure. Well, for point-wise for Michkov this season, what are you saying? I'm saying for me, 25 goals, maybe 19, 20 assists, really just getting into the thing.
I think I wouldn't be surprised that the assists are actually higher than the goals.
Okay.
I do. I based on what I saw in terms of, I think he's going to, there's definitely some play. There's some definite playmaking ability there. It depends again very much, I think, of who he ends up being partnered with. I think, if he's with a Morgan Frost, those are two creative offensive minds there. And that we might see if the two of them melt. And that's a case where, again, that could be something that, there's a lot of good elements up for Morgan Frost offensively. He's another player who attempts to make passes sometimes that line mates aren't necessarily ready for. If you've got somebody who's got of a like mind, I think in this circumstance, it's possible that the two of them can elevate each other's level. And that's something that I think I would look at. I don't think I'm ready necessarily to be over the 20. I think he's, and I'm sure this is going to come back to bite me probably by the end of this year if he ends up ripping off 35 goals or something like that, which would be beyond Flyer fans' wildest dreams in his first season. I think if he's topping out, I think if he's in the 20 goal range, that's good. I think, but I'm also eyeing up if he's getting a lot of offensive opportunity, I think especially if he gets power play opportunity here, and can kind of, his skill set might help to kind of unlock the Flyers power play, which has been, a very difficult subject for a lot of for the fan base, because it's unfortunately struggled. It has been it struggled for quite some time. I'd love to see him around 50 points. That'd be great. 20 goals and around 50 points. Could he get there with a lot of ice time? He could. Again, if he and another line mate clicks. If he ends up with a line mate, let's say like Sean Couturier, I think he could also potentially get that. And the advantage again with the Couturier is the fact that he's also good defensively, and he's now going to be a season removed from being out for 2 seasons with back injury. So, and Couturier is such an experienced player and can play with skilled players. I think if he's with either of those two line mates, it's just pace of play is going to be key. And Michkov's not a burner, but and that's what most people are. I think Flyer fans, casual Flyer fans, I think he's like lightning quick up and down the ice. I think he processes the game. I think that's the whole thing, is that he processes the game at an extremely high speed. His skating is good. It's when he gets into the offensive zone and then gets that down low play going. If he can get that going against NHL players, that's, then you get into really, then the conversation gets very tasty for Flyer fans.
Well, it's going to be tasty no matter what. It's something to look forward to this season. It's something to, every night you're going to be watching, see what you can do. Much watch player for the Flyers, which is great to see. I want to ask you this question, and a lot of Flyers fans probably ask this to you or people watching your shows. What is the biggest hole for the Philadelphia Flyers going into this season, in your opinion?
That's twofold. Again, as I just mentioned, I think the power play is something that the Flyers had some really good, strong 5-on-5 numbers, but the power play was something that really held them back last season. It just seems like it's a combination it was a combination of concepts. It was a combination of player execution. If they changed up concepts, then how they were supposed to, how they're supposed to set up. There were just times, and it's been like that for the last few seasons, where the power play has just been a great major source of frustration. If those power play numbers can go up and they can score on opportunities that come their way, that could be the difference between making the postseason and not, especially if they still keep up their level of strong effort, especially at 5-on-5. The other area that concerns me, it remains center. I think overall center depth in the organization isn't fabulous. If they take some injuries at that position, I think there's some I have definite concerns with that. As of right now, again, if you're looking at the lineup, if Frost, I think if he can really if he clicks with it, if he clicks offensively with a Travis Konechny, if he clicks with a Matvei Michkov in the circumstance, I think there's definitely some good offensive ability and good offensive talent there. Again, you still have Scott Lawton and Ryan Poehling. They're solid players. But then once you if you start getting in injuries, it just gets very thin, and you have to and you may need to move a player that you don't normally play. For example, first few seasons they had, when they had Noah Cates in his rookie season playing at the center position, and he did a good job defensively. I mean, there was even some whispers of, Selke consideration, but ultimately, Noah Cates, I think, has more to offer. I mean, in terms of being a winger, at the end. And he was doing, actually, before he took his injury last season, when he got moved off to the wing, there was flashes of that, of that offense, of that potential offensive capability with the defensive game. The one thing I worry about with him is the fact that, if he started off at center, now it's sort of, he's kind of almost in an in-between state. But I think if injuries happen probably as early on, especially to one of the centers, I think Cates could potentially end up being one of those players that ends up getting slid over to the center position. And I'm not sure how great that's going to be for him. But again, center to me is probably the one area where when the Flyers have to match up with other teams that have good center depth, I think that becomes an area of struggle for them. I think they still need to scout. I think they still need to look at the market. If there's a young center or a center maybe falling out of favor that they think can fit in, that they could make potentially a trade for. I had enough conversations over the summer about whether or not you look at a player, like still Peyton Krebs is still sitting out there, obviously, with Buffalo. I'm just looking at it more or less, even not saying necessarily he's a second line center or anything like that, but just feeling that there is a need for another. They need another
more depth
center,
in the organization.
More depth, exactly, in this circumstance, just to have that player. And again, there's not a lot of size down the middle either. That's the big concern. Couturier certainly has size, but Frost is, I would say NHL average size. So is Scott Lawton in this circumstance. And you go up against some heavy, teams that have skill centers that are bigger players. That's a matchup concern for me. So that's to me is, if I'm going to the two areas that I feel like the biggest holes. I don't want to say again, but it's like, well, what about goaltending? Is goaltending a question? And I think Sam Urson, it was an interesting thing. It was an interesting thing to watch last season. Urson sharing kind of really, I thought he did a good job. He and Carter Hart together, and then obviously Hart goes out for the reasons that everybody knows with Team Canada.
Yeah,
and Sam was kind of asked to shoulder the load, and they really didn't have that optimal backup situation. And then now going into this year, I think Sam has the capability of being an NHL number one, but there are obviously some other goaltenders that are in system that in a few years could potentially be knocking on the door. We'll see obviously what happens with as they finally brought over Ivan Fyodorov, obviously. Yep. That's a big how he plays as well. So goaltending, I think from the outside, certainly people might say that might be a question mark if, with Sam taking on the full load. The one thing I'll say about Urson though is that I think every time that he's started off at, knowing he's kind of the number one in this circumstance, he's at different levels. He's done a good job. So we'll see, obviously, this season. You hope that, he can shoulder load. He is the number one. I don't think there's any question about that. But I would put that as a sort of a low grade potential hole if they don't get really good performance, because the Flyers really benefited in being high up in the, being in the playoff race from really getting really good goaltending early in the season. Can you get that again with Urson now in the starting role and Fedotov, who now has had an off season? He kind of got thrown into the fire late into the season, had a great relief performance, and then he went up against Buffalo and just didn't look good at all. So now that they've had a summer to kind of establish themselves within their roles, Fedotov being over, can you get that level of goaltending again that can keep you in the race? Because I think they took advantage last year of certain teams having a down year in the division. The Devils, for example, taking advantage of the fact that the Devils had a down year. The Caps were kind of scuffling for a while until late in the season when they passed the Flyers. The Islanders also, had some struggles. The Penguins had some struggles, and the Flyers took advantage of that for a while. And now this year, those teams are all going to come back, and they now know that the Flyers are not going to be, they're not going to be an easy walkthrough anymore. They know that now after a season of that. So the element of surprise is kind of gone there. So the question is, as I've had some people ask me, well, maybe they should have gone bigger this offseason. But the problem is, again, they almost were kind of ahead of schedule and they last season, and then not making the postseason kind of put them in an interesting spot now. And now they have to adapt to the new norm. But again, having Michkov now obviously helps. I think certainly their wing depth is good in that regard, but we'll get into that in a few minutes.
Yeah, for sure. Well, I want to ask what the biggest gain is then. Obviously, the flip side of that coin, and Michkov aside, that is a big game for this team.
Wing depth, yeah. In this case, wing depth is huge. I think Philly does have a lot of, that's the one area. The center position is my biggest concern for them position-wise. The wing depth on the team is really is great. You have a Travis Konechny, who obviously just signed a long-term deal with the Flyers. You have him, Michkov, and you have Bobby Brink, who is also, again, I think a developing talent. And then Owen Tippett, who had been kind of a right winger. Now he's shifted now a little bit more towards the left side now. Tyson Forster, who I think has got Forster. Both. It's interesting watching both of those players. Obviously, the Flyers have really hitched their wagon, obviously, to Tippett. But Forster he was the one guy in that lineup last season where everybody was like, this is an NHL, this is a plus NHL shot. He was drafted in the first round with the understanding that he had that level. And the key question was skating. And he is now, I think his skating is at the point now where it's just fine. And now he's got that 5-tool kit of shots that when he's on and he puts a shot on, he has a lot of different ways that he can put that puck in the net. So between him, again, Tippett, and I like Tippett a lot. I still think there's still areas of his game that need to round out. There's times where I feel like he lapses defensively and makes mistakes. Sometimes he'll make mistakes trying to transition the puck into the offensive zone and the puck goes right the other way. And that's something that concerns me. Joel Farabee had it was a bit of a struggle. I mean, for the talent level that I think Joel Farabee has, it would not have necessarily surprised me this offseason if the Flyers had decided to trade him. Yeah. They did not. They obviously they kept him, and he actually, of all the players I know who when Michkov came over and is now in camp, he has spent a lot of time with Matt Michkov, so that's something potential to watch. You might see Farabee playing on a line with him because the two of them have had some time together in working together. So the Flyers' wing depth, I think, is actually pretty good when you're able to play again a Noah Cates and a Garnet Hathaway on your potentially on your fourth line. That's I like that a lot. I think there's some real good potential there in that respect. Beyond that, defensively, again, we need to see if Jamie Drysdale can be healthy. I think there's definitely flashes there, but again, that's been kind of the whisper knock is like, this is one of the reasons why Anaheim decided to move off of him in the Gauthier deal. They also had obviously other defensemen that they wanted to play higher in the lineup when they moved them, but the Flyers didn't have anybody, I don't think, like Drysdale. If he can be healthy, I think he could be an absolute weapon for the Flyers power play and help them with their quick in terms of their quick transition game. And that's one of the things I'm certainly looking at right now in that regard. So where they're going to be at in terms of health wise, they still have obviously Rasmus Ristolainen on the blue line as well. Yep. We'll see where he's at. Igor Zamula, I thought he had a really good season. Zamora was fascinating because, again, you wouldn't think of him as a power play weapon, but he's because of his steadiness last year, and he's got a low panic point. He kind of stabilized the power play at times, where from it being almost a complete disaster to, being not as much of a disaster at times from the back end. So the other areas I think that they're strong. I think their penalty kill, I think, is particularly strong. That's something that was a area that, under Brad Shaw, the power kill concept, the Flyers really fully embraced that. Especially a player like a Travis Konechny really became a weapon, I think, on the penalty kill. And those are some of the areas that I think, in terms of, I'm thinking of a gain, obviously Michkov just from the talent perspective, but just to add a layer of offensive depth to the wing. This is about as strong, to me, at least based on potential, is one of the stronger right wing combinations I think I've seen. And even the left side's good. But to me, Philly has to, they need to figure out, I think, to somehow either Morgan Frost takes things to a much even higher level this year, and maybe he and Michkov can unlock each other in that regard. The Flyers need to kind of, they've drafted. I mean, the Flyers have also recently have drafted at center. I don't, I like Luchenko. I don't think he's young draft. He was young for this draft. I don't see him figuring into the Flyers center situation right now. I anticipate he'll probably be heading back to junior, but they may get a look at him here a little bit during preseason. But that to me is the biggest thing. I think the wing depth is actually pretty good. The center depth is, but center, it's critical to me. Center is just, if you don't have a good, and it's not to say they're bad, but if you're getting into certain matchups, your center depth needs to be, I think they need a little bit more there in order for them to really start getting back to true contender status.
Well, that brings me to the next point here. I wonder what your expectations are for the Flyers this season. Do you see them competing again in a dogfight towards the end for a playoff spot? We all know that New Jersey hired a new coach, got a goaltender. They've done those things to kind of not put themselves in the position they were last year. Washington also made a couple of moves as well, trying to augment their lineup. Maybe you get a better look at Pierre-Luc Dubois in Washington, does some different things, maybe helps elevate that squad as well. Wondering where your expectations lie for this team. Would it be considered a failure if they missed the playoffs? Or would it be, hey, this team is still taking the right steps if you see things start to come together more so this season?
I still think they have to take a long-term view of things. Again, I have to, as I said, I have to couch everything from what happened last season. Last season was kind of an opportunity because of the fact that other teams in their division underachieved based on their talent base. And Philly was able to catch some teams, I think, by surprise in front of them because they thought it would, don't look at the lineup. This doesn't look like a team that's going to be hard for a higher talent. But again, will beats skill in a lot of circuits. Will can beat skill, but you still need to have skill. And if the Devils are kind of back and they've made some good moves. The Devils are kind of back where they need to be. I think it's going to be tough sledding for Philly to make the postseason. The one thing is that, again, the Flyers are coming in. It would not necessarily be considered a failure. I think if they didn't make the playoffs, what happens is that you have to see if your young talent is continuing to develop, is continuing to find those roles and continuing to become better players as they go along. How Matvei Michkov, handles his first season in North America, and how does he look? I think for Philly, again, they still have to hold on to the long-term view. They have 3 first-round picks coming into this draft, and this upcoming draft is a particularly good one. If they end up being in the upper echelon, I mean, I was at the draft, and there was enough talk about Philly was trying to move up to Columbus's number to get to potentially get to Cade Lindstrom. They know they need, that's a player that could potentially be a big part of their future, and they're going to be looking at centers in this draft. There's no question that they looked at him in this past draft. They're going to be looking at him in this. They'll be looking at him in this draft as well. So, long story short, roundabout way of saying it is that I don't think it'll be seen as a failure if they don't make the postseason. They want to make it. I don't think there's any question that they want to make it, but I do think they are trying to balance out their short-term competitive ability versus who they want to be necessarily over the long term. And if they make the postseason, that's great. And I think if they make the postseason, it'll be a pretty remarkable thing because I feel like those other teams that had higher talent bases that underachieved last season, if they don't underachieve and Philly is still battling it out with them at that point of the season, then that's an accomplishment in of itself.
No, definitely. All right. Well, let's do a little lightning round. We got our Philly talk in. I'm going to go some quick hits from you on the Leafs here. Mm-hmm. So from your perspective, the Leafs adds this offseason, are they enough to take them to the next level, especially on the back end?
From a player-to-player perspective, I do like the additions for them. And again, we're always having to do with the Leafs. Everything's about. It's almost like everybody's like, can we fast forward to the postseason, right? That's the old stuff, right?
Nobody wants the regular season.
And they're trying to be a bigger, stronger, heavier team, and much of the ads, I think, were designed in that circumstance. It does, I think, come down to matchups, too, in the playoffs. I mean, if they go up against the Boston, for whatever reason, it's like we say in Philly, it's like the Sixers against the Celtics. It's like the minute they get to play that series, it's like you got to get out of your own head. So it doesn't matter who you pick. Doesn't matter who it exactly is that you pick up. You have to kind of get out of your own head in order to succeed. So I'm okay on the move, but I'm like a lot of people with the Leafs. It's just like they things are changed around. I need to know what's going to happen with Marner in this circumstance. Especially after the contracts that obviously were doled out and where we're at now. And, what does Mitch do? Does he have this explosive season?
I think he does.
I think he's kind of almost has to, right? In this circumstance, considering, the amount of discussion there was about whether or not they're going to move off from him or not. So at least from the outside, you don't want to get to the point. The talent's there. How much of an in the room change is there with the captaincy change? With is giving Matthews the captaincy? In this circumstance, is it something like that where we always say, do we overrate the letters on the jersey? And I don't think you do. I still think it's an important thing. But if you're seen as sort of as being the player that, the straw that stirs the drink, so to speak.
Yeah.
Maybe that is something that maybe within the room, if Matthews has that additional responsibility now and he takes to it and evolves into that, it evolves even further. I mean, offensively, I don't know how much further you can evolve your game than Austin Matthews, but when you get into the playoffs, what is it that you're getting? And it really, to me, comes down to, again, who they match up with. Again, the year they got to the second round, obviously when they beat Tampa, that was, an opponent that they were able to match up with. And then they got to the second round and obviously struggled after that, because Florida was on such a heater at that point.
Well, the big adrenaline dump for the Leafs too. You finally do the thing, and
then Florida just absolutely just catches you because they were on an incredible run. But we also know Florida is legitimately one of the best teams in the National Hockey League now, defending Cup champs and everything. So there's a little bit of that too that you have to kind of keep in mind with the Leafs. So the moves they made this offseason, it's almost like they could make a lot of different moves. How is this all going to work? I do like the addition of Craig Berube. I genuinely do. I think it's definitely a mindset change for them. There's one thing I will, say is that, there's probably nobody that you sort of want to be in a foxhole series coaching your team than Craig Berube, from a person who's covered him when he was a Flyers head coach as well. There will be demand. There will be accountability. And again, he's coming in with the resume and a lot of respect from his time when he took over St. Louis. So it's how he sort of is able to sort of instill more of a, that gritty mindset that, when the going does get tough, no matter what your additions are, what is your core guys' mindset going in? How are they going to be able to execute? How do you put them in position to execute? And that's something that I think is really important. Berube could very well be, of all the acquisitions or moves that the Leafs have made this offseason, Berube could very well be the most important.
He definitely has the tact to be the most influential. I'm looking forward to that. The last thing I want to talk to you about, obviously in Flyers land, the Big E being stripped of the C. It was on front and center of the Toronto Sun in Toronto. We know this offseason, John Tavares loses his captaincy. Obviously, they tried to lessen the blow. They tried to make it look like he was passing the torch. I'm in the boat that I think he was. That's what he tried to do. The Leafs, kind of made it that way as well. Do you draw any comparisons between the two?
Not at all, because in this circumstance, it was the stripping of the C with Eric Lindros. It was that was an actively agitated situation. That was a organization and a player that at the time, and again, you look at Eric Lindros now, obviously I was genuinely concerned that bridges were burnt permanently when that happened. And obviously in recent years, and, we give a lot of credit to members of the Flyers alumni and certainly Paul Holmgren and other members of the organization that were able to get Eric to come back. But I still remember it distinctly. And I don't think it's the same. I think the Leafs probably handled it. I think they just kind of went, I think they got to Tavares and just said, hey, we know that you're a good player, but the prompt, you're also getting towards the back nine of your career. And that as we go forward, we want Austin to kind of be, he's already the face, but, to take maybe that even more of that mantle on more than anything. It could very well be good for Tavares as well. I mean, nobody wants to obviously lose. I don't think anybody wants to lose the C, but I think if he's a person, you always say if a person has good insight, and we talk about in psychology terms, they can look in the mirror themselves and say, I might be the player I was. I can still be a very productive player. And at the end of the day, whether he's the first guy if the Leafs win the cup and he's the first guy to hold up the cup, it'd be awesome. But at the same time, it wouldn't shock me if that happened. Actually, say if the Leafs did win the cup, it wouldn't shock me if the first person he turned to would be John Tavares in that circumstance. So if we get to that point, so I really don't. I feel like it's two completely different things. Whereas it was a really, really, for those obviously who covered the team back then, will say it was just things were really bad between the Flyers and Eric back then. They're not now, and I'm glad that is because Eric, I think, has become obviously an important part of the legacy of the Flyers, and he is. But definitely not. I really don't draw the same comparison there.
Well, I'm looking forward to this season, Anthony. I'm looking forward to talking to you when the Leafs and the Flyers do get together, highlight some Michkov, hopefully highlight a couple of Leaf rookies that might be in the lineup in Cowan and Minton. But I want to thank you. Always give me your time. You always sit down and talk shop with me, so I appreciate it. When I do put this up, I'll make sure everybody can go where to follow you and show the shows and get everything done. But I want to say, hope the season treats you well. Look forward to talking down the line, and thanks yet again.
Much appreciated, James. Appreciate you for having me on.
All right, well, there you have it, folks. This is Offside Hockey Talk, where the Maple Leafs and hockey come to talk.